Picture this. You're lying in bed. The room is dark, darker than usual. The kind of dark that swallows everything, even the outline of your own hands. You stare up at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep, but your mind drifts somewhere else, into that shadowy space between waking thought and dream. That's where it happens. Your brain begins to show you things, images, faces, places you've never seen. You feel your heartbeat rise, your chest tighten, and then, you wake up. For most people, nightmares end there. But what if they didn't? What if the things you saw in those dreams, the ones that made you sweat and gasp for air, began to leak into your real life? Welcome, to the world of nightmares that refuse to stay in your head. I've spent years investigating stories like these. People who claim their dreams warned them. Others who swore they'd seen moments from their nightmares play out days later. Some call it coincidence. Others, something deeper, a signal from the subconscious, or worse, a premonition of something they were never meant to see. Stay with me. Because tonight, we're peeling back the thin skin between sleep and waking, and what's underneath might just follow you there. Let's start with what we know. Nightmares, they're not just bad dreams. They're psychological alarms, triggered by fear, anxiety, trauma. When we enter REM sleep, the part of our brain that processes logic quiets down, but the emotional center, the amygdala, lights up like a flare. That's why everything feels so real. The chase, the fall, the scream that never comes out. Your body can't tell the difference between imagination and experience. Heart rate, adrenaline, even muscle tension, they spike like you're really there. But what about the content? The stories our minds play for us in the dark. Some nightmares are simple: you fall, you run, you wake up. But others are detailed, complex, eerily coherent, as if written by something outside of you. And that's where things get strange. Because when you start hearing from people across the world, from Ohio to Osaka, all describing the same dream, the same faceless man, the same static-filled voice whispering from the corner of a dark room, it starts to feel like more than just coincidence. Researchers have cataloged thousands of recurring nightmare reports. Themes that appear universally, across cultures and generations. Being chased by shadows. Teeth falling out. Losing control of your body. But every so often, a nightmare doesn't just resemble life, it predicts it. That's what drew me into this investigation. Because once you start looking into cases where dreams and reality overlap, you can't unsee the pattern. Imagine this. A woman wakes up, shaking, drenched in sweat. She's dreamed of a car accident. Her own. The road, the color of the car, even the song playing on the radio, all burned into her memory. She shakes it off, tells herself it's nothing. 2 days later, she's in that same car. That same song plays. And then, a deer crosses the road. The crash unfolds exactly as it did in her dream. Coincidence? Maybe. But when hundreds of similar stories start appearing, from people who've never met, living oceans apart, you start asking questions. I've read dozens of cases like this one. A man who dreamed of an intruder breaking into his home, and woke to find his back door open. A mother who saw her child choking in a nightmare, and rushed into their room moments before it actually happened. It's not always catastrophic. Sometimes it's subtle. A stranger from your dream shows up at a cafe. A phrase from a nightmare gets said, word for word, by someone you've never met. You tell yourself it's nothing. But deep down, a small part of you wonders if your subconscious knows something you don't. And then, of course, there are the others, people whose nightmares didn't warn them. They created them. Here's where science tries to make sense of the madness. Our brains are meaning-making machines. They take random static and weave it into stories that make sense, even if those stories aren't real. Psychologists call this pattern recognition bias. You dream of fire, then wake to smell smoke, and your brain links the two, ignoring that the smell came from your neighbor's late-night cooking. But there's another side to it, priming. Dreams plant ideas in our subconscious. Subtle cues, emotions, images. When you wake, those cues shape your decisions, what streets you take, how you react, even what you notice. Sometimes, those small shifts are enough to make the dream come true. It's not prophecy. It's psychology. Still, it doesn't explain the sheer detail in some cases, dreams that map out specific events, locations, faces that can later be verified. And that's where belief steps in. Some neurologists argue that these so-called predictive dreams might stem from our brain's ability to simulate thousands of outcomes while we sleep. Like a supercomputer of fear, running scenarios until one lines up with reality. But others, including some of the people I've interviewed, think there's something else happening. Something that can't be measured in brain waves or EEG scans. That brings us to our first real case. I first read about her in a small-town paper from Kansas. Her name was Elaine. 28 years old. Quiet, level-headed. No history of mental illness or superstition. One night, she dreamt she was in the passenger seat of her car. Someone else, a faceless figure, was driving. She kept trying to warn him, shouting that the road ahead curved sharply, but he wouldn't listen. The headlights lit up a sign, dead end. And then, impact. She woke up screaming. A week later, she and a friend took a late-night drive after a party. Her friend, same build, same jacket as the figure in her dream, offered to drive. They talked, laughed. The radio played softly. And then she froze. That sign. That exact dead end sign glowed in the headlights. Her friend swerved too late. They hit the ditch. Both survived, barely. When she told me the story years later, she still shook when she said that sign's name out loud. She'd tried to dismiss it. But the dream had played out detail for detail. It wasn't proof of anything, but it made her question the boundaries between imagination and intuition. And she wasn't alone. In the course of my research, I came across dozens of eerily similar stories. A retired pilot who dreamed of a plane engine fire, and found himself living it weeks later. A nurse who dreamed of a patient flatlining, the same patient who died on her shift the next morning. We call them coincidences because the alternative is too terrifying to accept. The next case haunted me for months. A man named Greg reached out after hearing one of my earlier episodes. His voice on the phone was steady, but something about it felt hollow. He told me he'd dreamt of a building, long hallways, green tile walls, and an operating table surrounded by rusted tools. He'd never seen it before. But when he woke, he couldn't shake the urge to find it. 2 weeks later, during a road trip with friends, they pulled off the highway to explore an old industrial town. That's when he saw it. The same building. Same green tiles. He said the air inside felt too still. Every sound echoed, but nothing moved. His friends wandered off while he stood in the center of an empty surgical room, and realized it matched his nightmare perfectly. When he turned to leave, he saw the outline of someone standing in the doorway. Not moving. Not breathing. He never found out if it was real or imagined. But after that night, his dreams changed. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back there, hearing faint whispers through the walls. He said to me once, "If a dream can follow you, what happens when it finally catches up?" I didn't have an answer. When I started this investigation, I thought I'd find psychological explanations for everything. But the deeper I went, the more it all began to blur. You start losing track of when you're awake. You dream of an interview before it happens, then realize, while sitting there later, that every word feels rehearsed. Dream journals are supposed to help. Write everything down. Look for patterns. But sometimes, that makes it worse. Because you start to notice the links. The names that repeat. The places that line up. And once you see the connections, you can't unsee them. That's when the real fear begins. What if our nightmares don't predict the future, but create it? Think about it, our thoughts shape behavior. Our behavior shapes reality. Fear becomes a map. If you dream of losing someone, maybe you call them less, out of guilt or dread. If you dream of crashing, maybe you drive differently, nervously, distracted, until the crash becomes inevitable. In that sense, we are the architects of our own horror stories. I spoke with a psychologist in Seattle who studies sleep-anchored trauma. She told me, dreams are emotional rehearsals. But when the emotion becomes stronger than the event itself, we start bending reality to match the rehearsal. It's terrifying, but it makes sense. Maybe nightmares are the brain's way of writing a story we're too afraid to face, and in trying to avoid it, we walk right into it. So why do we keep chasing them? Why do millions of us watch horror films, play with Ouija boards, read stories like this one, even when they make it harder to sleep? Because nightmares, in their own dark way, make us feel alive. They remind us of what we fear losing: control, safety, the illusion that we're untouchable. And maybe that's why we can't resist peering over the edge of sleep, wondering what waits beneath. If you've ever had a nightmare that bled into your waking life, one that stuck to you like static, share it in the comments. You might not be the only one. And if you're watching this before bed, don't worry. Most dreams fade with morning light. Most.